The wooden hull of the ship groaned, as though a living creature were being slowly ground between millstones of stone. The rotten, thoroughly salt-soaked oak of the black driftwood did not merely creak, it let out a strained, broken whistle every time the stern rose to the crest of an oily black wave. Pak Junho opened his eyes. The first thing he felt was not fear, but a sharp, cutting pain at the back of his head and a suffocating, concentrated smell of rotten fish, tar, and vomit. Where's my helmet? Where's the backup tank? The first thought fired automatically, trained by years of work in the Korean Coast Guard's rescue service and hundreds of hours of deep-water diving. The last thing he remembered from his previous life under the name Junho was the dull, vibrating rumble of a collapsing basalt slab in an underwater cave near Jeju. The line was severed instantly. Darkness closed in, and the pressure gauge in his suit let out a final dying beep. But here there was no pressure. Instead, there was pitching. Wild, chaotic, cracking ribs against the wooden planking. "Get up, you little rat. Get up, Fry, before the sea devil eats you." A hoarse, smoke-scarred voice rang out overhead. Junho tried to push himself up on his hands, but his fingers, thin, calloused, covered in chapped skin and dried blood, slid across the slimy muck coating the hold's floor. These were not his hands. These were the palms of a 13-year-old boy. Before he could grasp the full horror of what had happened, a rough boot, studded with rusty nails, slammed into his gut. Junho doubled over, gasping convulsively for air that turned out to be so bitter and salty it burned his lungs like fire. "Caleb, damn it, if you don't get your skinny ass up right now and get to the pump, I'll tie an old grate to your legs myself and feed you to the shield sharks." A huge, bearded man with a festering bandage where his left, I should have been grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and hauled him bodily upward. A flood of memories not his own, yet now inseparably bound to him, rushed into his consciousness. The world around him was no longer the round earth with its continents and warm resorts. This was the boundless expanse, a world where dry land was nothing but rare, barren granite peaks jutting out of an endless dark sea, and all of life was concentrated on the decks of ships and artificial floating reefs. His new body was called Caleb. He was barely 13. His father, the former captain of the Black Driftwood and head of the tiny, half-destitute clan of the Dead Reef, had died 3 weeks ago during a raid by privateers of Merchant Baron Vane. Now the ship, an old, warping two-masted schooner, was run by what remained of the crew. Drunkards, cripples, and a handful of frightened women left over from a once thriving family clan. And the clan itself now consisted of this single vessel and 2 rafts tied to it, crammed with 3 dozen hungry orphans and widows. "I'm coming," Caleb rasped. The voice came out weak, childish, but in the boy's eyes flashed the cold, calculating gleam of a grown man who had looked death in the eye dozens of times at 200 meters depth. The bearded man Brand, the old bosun, whose fingers on his right hand were curled from decompression sickness, which here was simply called the curse of the depths, froze for a second, startled by that look. Usually Caleb cowered under the planking and whimpered like a beaten pup. "That's more like it," Brand grunted, shoving the boy toward the wooden ladder. "Water's already knee-deep below decks. The port side sprang open after we caught that coral blade. If the pump gives out, we'll all be seabed sediment by noon." Caleb clung to the slick rungs, climbing up onto the deck. A furious squall met him at the top. The sky was leaden, without a hint of sun. Enormous, blue-black waves crowned with white foam tossed the schooner around like a splinter. On the forecastle, clinging to the shrouds, 3 women in soaked leather aprons struggled to hold what remained of a sail that the wind was thrashing like the wounded wing of a bird. The hull's hydrodynamics are compromised. The engineer skier's mind switched on instantly as Caleb ran toward the bow pump. Port list of about 12 degrees. Trim by the bow. We're taking on water too fast, and the vessel's losing buoyancy because of poor weight distribution. At the pump, a crude wooden piston with leather valves, a young girl with a pale face and disheveled red hair, was already working. This was Mara, his older sister. Her hands were rubbed raw to the flesh, blood oozing from beneath her nails. "Caleb, you're alive," she cried, barely holding on to the heavy lever. Bran said you'd hit your head during the attack and wouldn't get up again. Hold the lever, Mara. In sync on 3-4, Caleb cut her off, gripping the wood, slick with sea salt. He stood facing her. His new body was weak, malnourished, but Junho knew how to properly distribute weight. He didn't pull with his arms, he engaged the muscles of his back and legs, using the very pitching of the ship to raise and lower the piston. Now, he commanded. The wooden cylinder made a squelching sound. A stream of murky, oily water gushed from the outlet. 1, 2, 3. Caleb breathed evenly through clenched teeth, ignoring the burning in his muscles. His gaze was fixed on the bow of the schooner. This ship was designed by an idiot, Junho thought as the piston went up and down. The keel is too short for waves like these. The draft is excessive because the entire ballast is just raw granite stones dumped haphazardly in the hold. In rough seas like this, they shift, increasing the list. Mara, how much do we owe Baron Vane? He asked, without breaking his rhythm. The girl looked at her brother in surprise. Her brown eyes were full of tears and exhaustion. 3,000 silver marks, Caleb, or 30 healthy slaves. You know that. If we don't reach his floating residence, the Golden Nautilus, within 5 days, his privateers will simply cut the ropes on our living rafts. Our mothers and children will go under, and will be sold to the deep-water mines. 5 days, Caleb repeated. How far is it to the dead reef? Our old mooring. 2 days' sail, with a following wind. But why would we go there? There's nothing left but bones and rusted iron after the raid. Caleb didn't answer. At that moment, the schooner made an especially sharp plunge. A deafening crack sounded from the stern. One of the living rafts tied to the black driftwood by a thick hemp rope was thrown up onto the crest of a wave. On the raft, sheltered by scraps of canvas, women screamed. The ropes fraying against the gunwale. Bran bellowed from the poop deck. Hey, Fry, drop the pump, bring the axe. We have to cut it, or they'll drag the stern under. No. Caleb's shout cut through even the roar of the storm. He let go of the pump lever and, barely keeping his balance on the wet deck sliding out from under his feet, threw himself toward the stern. Bran was already raising the heavy, jagged axe over the rope, stretched taut as a string. On the raft, at that moment, 40 people, the families of their dead sailors, huddled together, understanding that they were about to be condemned to death. Get back, pup! Bran snarled. Either we all drown, or just them. The ship can't take that kind of strain. Caleb didn't argue. He assessed the angle of the rope's tension. If it were cut now, the stern would snap upward sharply. The schooner's bow would bury itself in the next wave, and the vessel would simply capsize because of the shifted ballast in the hold. Instead of grabbing for the axe, Caleb lunged forward, slipping under the bosun's arm. His fingers seized the mooring cleat. From the pocket of an old jacket, he pulled out a lump of tallow that dockside thieves used for greasing locks. Caleb found it in his memories. He literally wedged this greasy lump under the rope at the point of chafing, reducing friction, and then threw himself hard against the tiller, shifting the ship's angle to the wave. Fall off the wind. Bran, hold the helm. Change the angle 15 degrees to port. Caleb barked. The bosun obeyed out of sheer surprise. The heavy tiller wheel wrenched at his hands, but he held it. The schooner reluctantly, heavily, turned her bow. The tension on the rope slackened instantly. The raft slid off the crest of the wave into the trough, still tethered. Bran breathed heavily, staring at the 13-year-old boy as though he were looking at the ghost of the old captain. How? How do you know which way the wave's going to go, Fry? Caleb straightened up. The wind whipped his wet hair. There was not a trace of fear on his pale face. Water was the thing packed Junho had commanded his entire life. He knew its density, its force vectors, its laws. To the local sailors, the ocean was a capricious and malevolent god. To him, it was a complex but logical physical system. Because I don't want to die, Bran, Caleb answered coldly. And I won't give Baron Vane a single soul from our clan. Listen to my orders. We're changing course. What? Bran's single, I went wide. To where? We need to head for the trade routes, beg for mercy, or hire ourselves out as guards to other clans. We're going back to the dead reef. Caleb walked to the rail and looked down into the black, churning abyss beneath the ship. There, at a depth of about 40 meters, lay the remains of their former home. But Junho, having barely come to his senses, felt something strange. In the very depths of his consciousness, right at the border between past and present, a barely audible, low-frequency sound was vibrating. It was not a hallucination. The water around the ship seemed to whisper to him, carrying vibrations from every movement of the creatures on the seafloor. Caleb could sense the contours of the bottom without even seeing it. The voice of the abyss, an ancient name for this curse or gift, surfaced in his thoughts. There's nothing at the dead reef but rocks and reef monsters. Mara spoke up, having come up behind him. There's something there that will make us strong, Caleb answered, turning to face the rest of the crew. Other sailors had already begun climbing onto the deck. Old, one-legged carpenter Gunnar, lame cocker Torvald, and 3 more boys barely 16 years old. All of them were looking at the son of their late captain. Our ship is a rotten hulk, Caleb said, firmly and loudly, and his voice made the people fall silent. We're taking on water. Our ballast isn't secured. We won't make it to Vane's residence, and even if we do, he'll make us slaves. I'm proposing another path. We go back to our reef. We have 4 days. In that time, I will rebuild the black driftwood. I'll make her stop fearing waves and cannon. You? Rebuild her? Gunnar, the old carpenter, gave a bitter laugh, tapping his wooden leg on the deck. Little Caleb, you're confusing carpentry with children's games. To patch a breach on the port side, we need a dry dock, or at least a calm harbor without waves. And all we have around us is a storm and 100 fathoms of depth. Caleb walked right up to Gunnar. Despite the difference in height, the carpenter involuntarily flinched from the boy's cold, calculating stare. We don't need a dry dock, Gunnar, Caleb said quietly. We need negative buoyancy and a diving bell. I'll teach you how to repair the hull right underwater without hauling the ship ashore. The words negative buoyancy and diving bell sounded to the local sailors like an ancient incantation. They exchanged glances. Bran spat over the side, peering into the gray haze ahead. The wind's shifting, Captain's son, the bosun said grimly. If we turn for the dead reef right now, the waves will hit the stern. The raft might not hold. It'll hold if we shift the ballast. Caleb was already heading for the hold hatch. Bran, take the boys. Move all the stones from the bow of the hold to amidships. Mara, keep pumping, but take a break every 10 minutes so the valves don't dry out. Torvald, bring all the canvas we have and the old fat. We're going to make a sea anchor to stabilize the stern. Move it. If we don't level the list within the hour, the next wave will wash away our rafts. His orders were sharp, free of doubt. There was the experience in them of a man who had run rescue operations in icy ocean waters. The crew, worn down by weeks of panic, involuntarily submitted to this confidence. Limping, exhausted, hungry people rushed to carry out the orders of a 13-year-old boy. Caleb went down into the hold. The water there already reached his ankles. He walked to the port side, where dark seawater seeped through the gaps between the frames with a foul whistling sound. Caleb pressed his palm against the wetwood. Closing his eyes, he concentrated, and in that same instant, his awareness seemed to expand. He felt not just the leak he saw, through the vibrations of the water, the shape of the breach on the outside of the hull. It was a long, jagged gash left by a coral blade, a sharp bottom, growth the schooner had struck while fleeing. Length about 2 meters. 2 planks pierced clean through, a third cracked along its grain. Ordinary caulking from the inside won't hold this, Junho estimated. The water pressure outside will keep washing the oakum out. We need to set a patch on the outside. But how do you do that underway in a storm? And then the whisper in his head grew stronger. The water beyond the hull was not merely beating against the wood, it seemed to carry information within it. Caleb sensed that half a mile beneath them, on the dark bottom, something enormous was moving. Some colossal creature lazily stirred its fins, and its mana, or what was called the energy of the abyss here, rose to the surface in a thin trickle, resonating with the boy's body. Caleb opened his eyes. His right eye, which in his past life had been perfectly ordinary, now twitched, and for a second the pupil widened, becoming vertical like that of a deep-sea fish. "The curse of the depths," he whispered, looking at his hands. "No, this is a tool, and I will make this world play by my rules." He turned to his late father's toolboxes. Among the rusty saws and chisels, he searched for what could serve as the foundation for his first engineering marvel in this world. He needed a large, empty, freshwater barrel, copper tubing from the old, still his father had used for desalination, and leather bellows. 2 hours later, the schooner Black Driftwood, pitching heavily through the waves but no longer with a deadly list, settled onto a new heading. Course, the Dead Reef. There, among the ruins and the monsters, Pak Jun-ho intended to lay the foundation of his future undersea empire. The storm didn't die down until the close of the second day. The sky over the boundless expanse shifted from leaden black to dirty gray. The sea around the Black Driftwood now resembled congealed jelly, heavy, oily, sluggishly heaving in long, shallow swells. Caleb stood on the forecastle, holding the rail. Over the past 48 hours, he had slept perhaps 4. His new body ached with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with a feverish glint. Behind the schooner, the 2 living rafts still trailed obediently. Thanks to the sea anchor Caleb had built from an old torn sail and barrel hoops, the rafts were no longer being flung from side to side. They now rode smoothly in the schooner's wake, cutting the water's resistance. "We're here, Caleb," Mara said quietly, coming up to him. She held out a piece of dried, striped fish tuff as a shoe sole and bitter with salt. It was the last of their provisions. There ahead, the dead reef is gone. Caleb took the fish, began chewing it slowly, staring at the horizon. Only 3 black, jagged granite peaks jutted from the water, like the fangs of some drowned titan. Around them the water churned and foamed. These were hidden reefs. Once between these peaks, their clan's floating settlement had stood, old ships joined by gangways, driftwood platforms, pens for growing seaweed. Now only charred logs and scraps of netting floated there. Everything of value, Vane's privateers had hauled away, and the rest they had burned. "Brant," Caleb called without turning around. "Drop anchor 50 meters to the leeward side of the central peak. There's a depth of about 15 meters there, a sandy shelf between the reefs. The ship will be safe from the surf." "How do you?" Bran started to ask how the boy knew about the sandy shelf, but only waved his hand and went off to give the order. Over the past 2 days, he had come to understand that arguing with the captain's son cost more trouble than it was worth. The boy seemed to see through the depths of the water. The heavy stone anchor, wrapped in chains, sank into the water with a muffled splash. The schooner shuddered, drew the rope taut, and went still. The living rafts slowly drew up toward the stern. From them, pale, exhausted faces of women and children stared at the ruined reef. Their home had been destroyed, and they didn't understand why they had been brought to this graveyard. "Gunnar, Torvald, Bran to me," Caleb ordered, descending to the quarterdeck. The men gathered by the mainmast. Gunnar leaned on his crutch. Torvald held a sack of oakum and the remains of some pitch. "We have exactly 3 days before we're due to present ourselves to Baron Vane," Caleb began, unrolling a piece of parchment on the hatch cover, on which strange diagrams had been sketched in charcoal. "Patching the breach from the inside, as I've said, is pointless. The water will blow out any plug on the crossing. We're going to repair the port side from the outside, right underwater." Gunnar frowned, studying Caleb's drawing. "Boy, I'm a 3rd-generation carpenter. My grandfather built war catamarans for the Iron Clan. No one, ever, has worked underwater longer than an adult diver can hold his breath. And that's 2 minutes at best. In 2 minutes, you couldn't even fit a plank, let alone drive a nail. Besides, the depth at the port side is about 4 meters below the waterline. A man would just get smeared against the hull at the slightest wave. If a man is simply hanging from a rope, yes," Caleb agreed calmly. "But if we lower this down there," he pointed at the diagram. It was a drawing of a large oak freshwater barrel, but completely reworked. The bottom of the barrel had been knocked out. Into the top were set 2 copper tubes from the desalination still. To one of the tubes were attached the leather bellows normally used to fan the flames in the ship's forge. Inside the barrel, a small seat for one person was mounted, and a heavy ballast of cast iron grate bars was fixed on an external hanger. "What's this coffin?" Bran narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "It's a diving bell," Caleb answered. "Gas physics, Bran. If you turn an empty glass upside down and lower it straight down into water, the water won't rise all the way to the top inside it. The air inside compresses but forms a cushion. A person sitting inside this barrel will be able to breathe. And if we constantly pump air in from above through the bellows via the copper tube, we can push the carbon dioxide out through the second tube. A person could sit in there for hours." The men fell silent. They looked at the diagram, then at Caleb, then at one another. The idea seemed insane, unnatural. Water was the domain of monsters and the dead. Climb down into it, inside a barrel? Is this abyss magic? Torvald asked quietly, making the sign of the 3 fins. "It's mechanics," Caleb cut him off. "And it's our only chance. Gunnar, you have a 300-liter barrel. Its bottom needs to be knocked out and the edges reinforced with iron hoops, so the pressure doesn't crush the wood. Torvald, your job is sealing it. Wrap every joint of the copper tubes in canvas soaked in boiling fat and wax. Bran, you'll man the bellows. If you stop pumping for even a minute, whoever's inside will suffocate. And who's going down inside this wooden drowning box?" Bran asked grimly. "I'm not going in there. My gut won't fit through that hole, and I'm no swimmer with one arm anyway. Gunnar's missing a leg. That leaves the green boys, but they messed themselves at the sight of a reef shark." "I'll go inside," Caleb said. "No." Mara, who had been standing nearby, listening to the conversation, ran up and grabbed her brother by the shoulders. "Caleb, you're out of your mind. You're the head of the clan. Your father's only heir. If you drown, the clan stops existing." Caleb gently but firmly removed her hands from his shoulders. "Mara, if I don't do this, the clan stops existing in 3 days. No one but me knows how to regulate the pressure inside the bell or how to properly set an underwater patch. I know what I'm doing. Trust me." There was so much grown, unshakable authority in his voice that Mara fell silent, only biting her lip until it bled. Preparations took the rest of the day and half the night. A small forge burned on the deck of the black driftwood. Torvald huffed and puffed, welding and twisting the copper tubes. Gunnar, cursing everything under the sun, reinforced the oak barrel with additional bracing. Caleb personally checked every seam, every knot. He used a sturdy tactical canvas, a patch that had first been thickly smeared with a mixture of tar, tree resin, and sheep fat. This patch was meant to be pressed against the breach from outside by the water pressure, while Caleb, from inside the bell, was to fix it in place with wooden battens and copper nails driven right through the planking. By the time the pale moon rose, the bell was ready. It hung from the main yard arm of the mainmast, swaying above the dark, oily water. 2 long leather hoses, reinforced inside with a spiral of copper wire so the water pressure wouldn't flatten them, ran up from its top. Caleb walked to the rail. He wore only light canvas trousers and a leather vest. A heavy carpenter's hammer, a knife, and a pouch of nails hung from his belt. "Caleb," Bran walked over to the bellows. His face was more serious than Caleb had ever seen it. "I'll pump as if my own hide depended on it. Because it does. The rhythm has to be steady, Bran," Caleb answered. "1 pump every 2 seconds. If I pull the signal rope once, pump harder. If twice, bring the bell up immediately. 3 times. Means there are guests down there." He didn't bother to specify exactly what kind of guests might come drawn by the smell of fresh wood and human flesh in the waters of the dead reef. Everyone already knew. Caleb climbed over the rail and got inside the barrel from below, gripping a special crossbar. Inside it was dark, smelling of damp and sour wine the barrel had once held porter. He sat on the narrow seat. The water reached his knees. "Lower away," he shouted up. The block creaked. The barrel swayed and began slowly sinking. The black, icy water of the boundless expanse rose to his waist, then to his chest, and stopped at armpit level. The air cushion had worked. Caleb found himself in an enclosed, swaying space. From above, through the copper tube, came a hissing first breath of fresh air. Bran had started working the bellows. The bell kept sinking deeper. Through the open bottom of the barrel, Caleb watched the moonlight above rapidly fade, giving way to a thick, phosphorescent darkness. And in that darkness, his voice of the abyss kicked into full gear. The vibrations of the water became tangible. He could feel the schooner above gently rocking on the waves. He could feel the reef rocks 30 meters away from him. But strangest of all, he could feel the mana of this world. It was dissolved in the water like salt. Caleb closed his eyes and tried to do what this body's memory had taught it, but adjusted by his own knowledge as an engineer. He tried to focus these vibrations around the bell, creating a kind of hydroacoustic shield that smoothed out the water's oscillations. The barrel bumped softly against the schooner's port side. Caleb opened his eyes. Right in front of him, in the water, lit by the faint greenish glow of bottom plankton, was the breach. The jagged edges of the oak planks stuck outward like broken ribs. Dirty bilge water seeped out from inside the ship. Good. Let's begin, Caleb thought. He took the first piece of tarred patch from his pouch. Working underwater was unbelievably hard. Every motion demanded enormous effort against the resistance of the water. He had to lean halfway out of the bell's air pocket, hold his breath for 30 to 40 seconds, press the patch against the hull, and then return under the dome to take a few desperate breaths. The sound of his hammer driving copper nails into the underwater part of the hull carried for miles through the water. To Caleb, that sound was the rhythm of salvation. But to the creatures of the deep, it was an invitation to dinner. About half an hour passed. Caleb had already fastened the first third of the patch when the whisper of the abyss in his head sharply changed tone. The calm, measured vibrations gave way to fast, ragged pulses coming from the direction of the open sea. Something was approaching. Something long, sinuous, and very fast. Caleb froze, ducking back inside the barrel. His heart began pounding wildly. He pressed his palm against the inner wall of the barrel, reading the vibrations. Length about 3 meters. Speed, roughly 12 knots. 3 targets. In the opening beneath his feet, in the faint phosphorescent light, a long gray shadow flashed by, its dorsal fin razor sharp. It was a spine-fin reef shark, a pack hunter that could smell a drop of blood a mile away, and the hammering had drawn them in like wounded prey. One of the sharks passed right beneath the barrel, brushing it with its tail. The bell rocked hard. Up on deck, Bran felt a jerk on the rope. "Caleb, what's happening down there?" A muffled, barely distinguishable shout came through the air hose. Caleb grabbed the signal rope. He was supposed to pull it 3 times to be hauled up. But if he was pulled up now, the unfinished patch would simply be torn off by the current, and all his work would be for nothing. The schooner would remain doomed. "No." Junho gritted his teeth. "I won't run. I'm a rescuer, not a victim." He drew the long, serrated knife from his belt, his father's bone cutter, made from the barb of a deep-sea ray. His hand didn't shake. In his previous life, he'd had to fight off aggressive seals and cut tangled nets underwater in total darkness. The shark turned and headed straight for the open mouth of the barrel, drawn by the warmth of a human body. Its jaws, lined with 3 rows of teeth thin as needles, opened wide. Caleb didn't try to dodge. Instead, he used the voice of the abyss. He sharply projected forward a mental wave, a concentrated pulse of fear and dominance that he had intercepted from that enormous creature at the bottom of the ocean. It was raw, unrefined mana of the abyss. The shark froze for a second, a cloudy film passing over its small black eyes. That second was all Caleb needed. He lunged sharply downward and drove the bone cutter precisely into the monster's spiracle, right behind the eye. The force of the blow was such that the knife went in all the way to the hilt. The shark thrashed convulsively, and the water around the barrel instantly turned black with blood in the darkness. Caleb yanked the knife back out and kicked the body, thrashing in its death throes out of the bell. The water inside the barrel now tasted brackish of rust. "The other 2 will fall on their wounded kin now," Caleb reasoned. I've got 3, maybe 5 minutes while they're occupied. He didn't pull the rope. Instead, he leaned back out of the barrel, working with tripled intensity, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the icy cold of the water, which was already beginning to seize up his muscles. He set about driving in the remaining nails. Thud, thud, thud. His hammer worked like a mad machine. He pressed the battens in place, secured the edges of the canvas, sealed the joints with the remaining resin from the underwater syringe tube he'd rigged out of a copper pipe and a piston. Outside, 10 meters away from him, the other 2 sharks were tearing their dying kin apart. The water churned with their fury, but they came no closer to the bell, the residual trail of abyss mana that Caleb had involuntarily released during the strike frightened them more than the scent of blood attracted them. Last one, Caleb rasped, driving a copper spike into the top edge of the patch. The patch set fast. The water pressure from outside now pressed the fat-soaked fabric against the hull itself, completely cutting off the water's access into the hold. Caleb climbed back inside the barrel, barely breathing. His hands shook from the cold. He reached for the signal rope and pulled it sharply twice. Up above, a chorus of curses rang out from Bran and Gunnar. The block creaked, and the bell began to rise. A minute later, the barrel surfaced. Bran and Torvald hauled it over the rail and dropped it onto the deck. Caleb climbed out, breathing heavily and coughing. Mara immediately threw a dry woolen blanket over his shoulders and brought a mug of hot, fresh water steeped in pine needles to his lips, their only remedy against colds. "You're alive. You did it." Gunnar was already peering into the hold hatch with a lantern. "Caleb, the water in the hold isn't rising anymore. It's staying put. The patch is holding fast." The sailors looked at the 13-year-old boy with awe and dread. They had seen the sharks circling by the hull. They had seen the blood rise to the surface. But the boy had come out of it a victor. Caleb shivered, gripping the mug with both hands. His gaze was fixed eastward, toward where, beyond the horizon, barren Vane's golden nautilus lay. "Stage 1 complete," Caleb said quietly, and there was a steely edge in his voice now. "The hull is stabilized. Tomorrow we begin Stage 2. Gunnar, get the saws ready. We're cutting off the forecastle and repositioning the masts. We're turning this old schooner into the first ramming frigate of the boundless expanse." Bran looked at where the late Tay Hyen used to stand at the helm, remembering the old captain, and slowly lowered himself onto one knee before the 13-year-old boy. "Lead us, Jarl Caleb," the old bosun said, quietly but firmly, using an ancient word, nearly forgotten in these parts, for a supreme war chieftain. "It seems the abyss truly has chosen you." The rest of the sailors exchanged glances, and one by one followed his example. Even old Gunnar, the carpenter, bowed his head, leaning on his crutch. Caleb looked at them, and in his mind blueprints for future underwater turbines, ballast tanks, and heavy bow rams capable of cracking the ships of the merchant barons like nutshells were already taking shape. His new life was only just beginning. 2 days of the dead reef turned the deck of the black driftwood into something resembling both an infernal forge and a shipyard at once. The calm that followed the storm played into Caleb's hands. The water around the black granite peaks was clear as glass, and through it, at a depth of 15 meters, the outlines of the sunken platforms of their former home could be made out. Caleb wasted no time. His new 13-year-old body adapted quickly to the strain, spurred on by the awakened energy of the abyss. He slept in short 2-hour stretches, spending the rest of his time on deck, directing the work. "Gunnar, cut here, right along the 11th frame." Caleb marked the massive oak beam supporting the forecastle structure with charcoal. The old carpenter, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve, looked at the boy doubtfully, but didn't argue. "Caleb, if we cut off the bow structure, the schooner will lose her familiar shape. We'll be exposing the bow. In a head sea, all that water will be ours to deal with. Our job isn't to ferry merchants around in dry cabins, Gunnar," Caleb answered, helping Torvald tighten a fastening bolt on the bow bracing. The old design created excessive windage and colossal drag. By cutting off the forecastle, we'll lower the center of gravity by almost a meter and reduce the bow trim. The ship will become aggressive, maneuverable, and capable of 2 knots more speed than before. As for the water, we'll route it back into the sea across the deck through widened scuppers. In his previous life, Junho had designed low-profile, high-speed rescue boats. He knew that in the conditions of the boundless expanse, where privateer artillery fired point-blank at high hulls, a low silhouette was the best armor there was. While Gunnar and the young recruits sawed through the centuries-old oak with much cracking and cursing, lightening the bow, Caleb turned to the ballast. The stones that had once lain scattered chaotically in the hold were removed. In their place, Caleb had heavy cast-iron grate bars salvaged from old dockside winches they'd raised from the sunken reef platform, using the diving bell moved down to the very bottom, against the keel. He personally calculated the metacentric height, a concept the local sailors had not the faintest notion of. To them, a ship's stability depended on the mercy of the sea maidens. To Caleb, it depended on the distance between the center of gravity and the metacenter. By distributing the irons strictly along the ship's longitudinal axis and securing it with wooden braces, he achieved a schooner that, freed of her heavy bow, now sat in the water straight as an arrow. "Would you look at that?" Brand said, standing on the living raft, studying the schooner's lines in astonishment. "She's sitting lower in the water, but her stern's come up. She looks like a predatory dogfish, ready to pounce." "She is a predator, Brand." Caleb climbed onto the forecastle. The bow of the schooner was gone. In its place was a flat deck sloping smoothly downward, plated with thick iron strips salvaged from an old winch drive. But the main innovation was the ram. Caleb hadn't built the ordinary above-water beak that the rare warships of the merchant barons used. Drawing on his knowledge of underwater hydrodynamics, he had designed a submerged ram, a massive, pointed log of bog oak, banded with 3 layers of iron, mounted to the keel 1.5 meters below the waterline. Such a ram didn't merely break an enemy vessel's side, it punched through below the waterline, at the most vulnerable point one no repair crew could reach during a battle. In addition, the underwater bulb generated extra lift while underway, reducing the bow's wave resistance. "Torvald, how's the mixture coming?" Caleb asked, approaching a steaming vat at the stern. The lame caulker was stirring a thick, black mass with a wooden paddle, giving off a suffocating, sweetish smell. "Made it exactly to your recipe, Jarl. 2 parts pine resin, 1 part whale fat, and that secret edition of yours crushed gray limestone from the reef. The stuff turned out vicious. Sticks to wood like a curse, even when it's wet." "That's waterproofing mastic," Caleb nodded with satisfaction. "Coat the entire underwater section of the port side with it, over our patch. 3 layers. Once we're at sea, the cold water will harden this mixture into a solid shell." By the close of the 3rd day, the black driftwood had changed beyond recognition. She had lost her old, cumbersome bearing, becoming gray, low-slung, with masts raked sharply backward like a predator's stance. Caleb ordered the entire hull painted with tar boiled in coal dust. The ship all but vanished against the gray waters of the boundless expanse. The whole clan gathered on deck. The women from the rafts looked at the transformed vessel with a mix of fear and hope. They had watched a 13-year-old boy, through his own wits and will, drive cripples and drunkards to work around the clock without tiring. Something reappeared in the people's eyes that they had lost after the old captain's death faith. "We leave in an hour," Caleb announced, gazing at the pale, setting sun. Ahead lies the golden Nautilus and barren vein. They're expecting docile slaves who'll crawl in on some rotting hulk to beg for mercy. But we're not coming to beg. We're coming to take what's ours. I swear on my one good eye, I want to see the look on that fat pig Vane's face when he sees our schooner." Bran roared, brandishing his axe. The sailors let out a unified roar, tossing their battered hats into the air. The clan of the Dead Reef was ready for its first and last crossing in its old form. The 4th day of the journey brought fog. A dense, milk-white shroud enveloped the ocean, cutting visibility down to 30 meters. To ordinary skippers of the boundless expanse, this was a curse in fog. It was easy to run afoul of a stray reef or a sleeping leviathan. But for Caleb, it was perfect cover. He stood at the tiller, eyes closed. The voice of the abyss inside his mind worked like a flawless radar. Through the mass of water, he picked up the vibrations of waves reflecting off distant obstacles. He could feel a warm current passing far to the left, and dead ahead, 2 miles off, an enormous artificial platform lazily rolling on the swells. The Golden Nautilus, Baron Vane's floating residence, was a colossal conglomerate of three-deck galleons lashed together. It was a genuine floating castle, with luxurious cabins, brothels, weapons stores, and enormous holds where hundreds of slaves languished. Around the Nautilus, 2 or 3 light privateer tenders usually patrolled the approaches. "Caleb, the fog's too thick," Mara whispered, standing beside him with a spyglass now utterly useless. "We could run straight into their patrols." "We won't run into anything," Mara, her brother, answered calmly, smoothly nudging the tiller a couple of degrees to starboard. "The patrols are riding at anchor, saving mana for their signal lights. They think no one would dare move in fog like this. They're relaxed." Suddenly, the whisper of the abyss in his head grew sharp. A concentrated sound pulse had bounced back off something large and hollow, dead ahead. "Bran, Torvald, to the guns," Caleb ordered quietly. The black driftwood carried only 3 old bronze culverins, firing iron balls. Caleb had had them modernized. Gunnar had carved new wooden wedges to adjust elevation, while Torvald had sorted through the powder charges, dividing them into measured portions for maximum accuracy. A huge, dark wall slowly emerged from the fog ahead. It was the starboard side of the Golden Nautilus. Lights burned dimly on her upper decks through the white haze. Music played on board. There was laughter, the clink of glasses, the shouts of drunken mercenaries. Baron Vane was celebrating another successful sale of human cargo. They hadn't even posted stern lookouts, so certain were they of their absolute impunity. The small, low, black schooner drew up almost flush against the Titan. Unnoticed thanks to her low profile and lack of tall mast, Caleb had ordered them to proceed under nothing but the lower foredaft sails. "Ahoy, the schooner! Who goes there?" A sleepy shout suddenly rang out from the Nautilus's upper deck. One of the guards, coming up to the leeward foredeck, had finally spotted the dark shape below. Caleb straightened. His right eye flared with the golden fire of the system, while his left filled with the black abyss of the ocean. "This is the clan of the Dead Reef," Caleb said quietly, but in a way that carried across the entire waters. "We've come to collect a debt. The full amount one way." He wrenched the tiller sharply toward himself. "Full speed. Bran, cut the raft lines, let them stay in the fog." "Good Nordrum." The schooner, like a released bowstring, surged forward with sudden speed. The submerged oak bulb, hidden beneath the water, drove straight for the underwater section of the central galleon of the Golden Nautilus. The seconds before impact stretched into an eternity for Caleb. In his past life, on rescue operations, he had known this moment the instant before collision, when the inertia of a multi-ton mass becomes an unstoppable, destructive force. The black driftwood ran at the very limit of what her rebuilt hull could give. The cut-down bow no longer buried itself in the swell. It sliced straight through the oily water, while the submerged oak bulb ran 1.5 meters deep, like a torpedo, aimed at the single most vulnerable point of Baron Vane's floating castle. "Hang on to the shrouds," Bran bellowed, gripping the taut mainmast stay with his one free hand. The sound of the underwater impact was dull, vibrating, running through the whole schooner from keel to masthead. The black driftwood stopped abruptly with a groan, her stern rearing up. Sailors who hadn't managed to brace themselves were flung across the deck. Old Gunnar was thrown against the rail but held on, his wooden leg jammed fast into the bulwark. But what happened to the Golden Nautilus was incomparably worse. Caleb's iron-banded underwater ram, at full speed, drove into the starboard side of the central galleon below the waterline. The dry, centuries-old oak of Vane's flagship, never built to withstand deep mechanical stress, burst like an overripe pumpkin. Enormous 3-meter planks of hull planking shattered into splinters, opening a monstrous breach 2 men's height wide. Thousands of tons of black, icy, boundless expanse seawater roared into the Nautilus's main hold, where stores of gunpowder, grain, and tons of colonial goods were kept. On the upper decks of the floating castle, the music died instantly. A wild, panic scream rose from hundreds of throats. The huge conglomerate of 3 ships lurched hard to port, listing toward the breach. Thick steam billowed from the hatches. The water had reached the galley stoves. "Back! Reverse! Row her back!" Caleb commanded, throwing his weight against the tiller. "Bran, sails to port tack! Move! If their yards catch us, we go down with them." The sailors, stunned by their own success, worked flawlessly. The fore and aft sails snapped in the wind, swinging over to the opposite side. The black driftwood, thanks to her shortened keel and superbly balanced ballast, backed away smoothly like a well-fed shark, pulling her splinter-bloodied ram out of the Titan's wound. Out of the breach in the Nautilus, along with the churning water, came barrels, broken furniture, and the bodies of vain, stunned sailors. "I'll be damned. We hold her. We hold the cursed palace." Torvald laughed madly, dancing around his culverin. Too early to celebrate. Caleb cut him off coldly, peering through the fog, thinning now from the heat at the enemy's upper decks. "They've got 3 ships lashed together. The right and left galleons give them excess buoyancy. They won't sink right away. Bran, Torvald, fire on the starboard galleon's gun ports. Don't let them bring their cannon to bear." Organized alarm finally broke out aboard the Golden Nautilus. A bell clanged. Heavy mercenary boots pounded across the decks. From the windows of the stern superstructure appeared the fat, purplured face of Baron Vane himself, in a silk robe embroidered with gold thread. "Privateers, to the guns. Blast that black hulk to splinters. Where are my tenders?" the Baron shrieked, clutching the gilded balustrade railing. 2 patrol privateer tenders fast, light, single-masted luggers, standing off in the fog, finally understood what was happening. Out of the white shroud, oars and sails cutting furiously through the water, burst the first tender under Vane's black flag. On her bow stood a long bronze gun, and along her rail crowded some 20 cutthroats with boarding sabers and muskets. "Jarl Caleb, they're coming to board," Mara shouted, drawing her father's flintlock pistol from her belt. Her red hair whipped in the wind, and where fear used to be, her eyes now burned with pure, fierce resolve. The women of the clan of the Dead Reef, still aboard the schooner, took up smithing tongs and axes. "Let them come." Caleb didn't even turn his head. His voice of the abyss had already probed the approaching tender's lines. "Their draft is too shallow. The ram's useless against them. They're more maneuverable than us. Torvald, reload the center culverin with chain grapeshot. Aim for their mast when they're within 30 meters." The privateer tender closed rapidly on the black driftwood. The first musket shots rang out from her deck. Bullets thudded dryly into the schooner's oak sides, splintering wood. One of Caleb's young recruits cried out, clutching a shot shoulder, and collapsed onto the planking. "Hold the line. No firing without orders." Bran stepped forward, shielding the boys with his massive body and a heavy boarding shield. Caleb waited. He could feel the vector of the enemy vessel's motion. The privateers wanted to come alongside their port side, precisely where, beneath 3 layers of mastic, lay the patch Caleb himself had repaired. "Think that's the weak spot? Go ahead," Junho thought, with an inward smirk. When no more than 30 meters separated the ships, Caleb yanked hard on the signal rope tied to Torvald's leg. "Fire!" the cocker roared. The old bronze culverin barked, throwing up an enormous column of gray powder smoke. 2 iron cannonballs, joined together by a heavy forged chain, shrieked out of the barrel. This projectile, which Caleb had devised based on old designs from the age of Earth-sailing fleets, worked perfectly. The chain unfurled in flight, and, with a horrific metallic crunch, slammed straight into the middle of the privateer tender's mast. The mast, cut through at its very base, groaned and toppled forward, dragging sails and rigging down with it, and burying half the mercenary crew on the forecastle under a heavy net of canvas. The privateer lugger instantly lost way and steering, beginning to swing broadside by sheer momentum. "Bran, take the boys. Boarding hooks. We're taking their ship," Caleb ordered, drawing his bone cutter. At that moment, his left eye, veiled in the dark mist of the abyss, caught strange movement in the water between the three ships. The blood of the mercenaries and sharks spilled during the first stage of the battle had not gone unnoticed. From the dark depths of the boundless expanse, drawn by the scent of slaughter and the powerful vibrations of destruction, something colossal was rising. The voice of the abyss in Caleb's head literally exploded with a wild, vibrating ultrasonic roar. "Warning. Detected the emergence of an endemic creature of the abyssal lair. Warped Kraken juvenile specimen. Rank C warning. Mana density in this sector exceeds normal levels by 300%. A depth tide has begun. The water around the listing Golden Nautilus suddenly stopped churning and went smooth as a black mirror. Then, slowly, one after another, enormous purple-black tentacles began to rise from it, covered in slimy suckers and bony spikes, each as thick as a ship's mast. One of the tentacles casually wrapped around the stern superstructure of Vane's left galleon and, with a horrifying sound, crushed it, turning the gilded cabins into a heap of wreckage. "Sea Devil, it's a kraken, spawn of the abyss," Bran shouted, dropping his boarding hook. The mercenaries on the damaged tender forgot about the fight too. They were scrambling in terror onto the remains of their mast, watching the monster begin to coil around the Golden Nautilus. Caleb froze on the stern of the black driftwood. His 13-year-old body shook with a violent tremor, but it was not fear. It was resonance. The energy of the abyss inside his vessel churned like boiling water. He could feel the creature's mind primitive, hungry, driven by pure fury and bloodlust. Caleb's left eye had gone completely black, without pupil or white. He looked straight down into the water's depths, to where, beneath the surface, a colossal round eye the size of a carriage door could be made out. "You came right on time, big fellow," Caleb whispered, his voice suddenly doubled by a low, guttural echo that made the deck planks tremble. "But this sector, these ships, are mine now. Care to share?" He sharply raised his hand, bone cutter clenched in it, and pointed the blade precisely toward the listing central galleon of Baron Vane, sending out a monstrous mental impulse of compulsion. Reinforced by his unique engineer's mind, he was literally pointing the Kraken toward the structurally weakened points of the enemy flagship. The creature froze for a second, as if startled that some small two-legged thing dared give it orders. But Caleb's impulse was too precise, and the scent of blood from the Nautilus's breached hold too tempting. With a deafening roar that left every survivor's ears ringing, the Kraken brought its main tentacles crashing down directly onto the deck of the Golden Nautilus, splitting the colossal floating castle in two. "Bran, helm to starboard. We're pulling back to our rafts," Caleb shouted, regaining control of his own body. "Torvald, finish off the tender before they come to their senses." History was approaching its turning point. The old order of the merchant barons was cracking apart under the blows of monsters and the genius of a Korean engineer. The water around the Golden Nautilus had turned into a churning cauldron of foam, wreckage, blood, and inky slime. The colossal floating castle of Baron Vane, which had once struck terror into half the boundless expanse, was breaking apart with a long, grinding, metallic shriek. The huge mass of the three lashed-together galleons crossed, caught on each other's yards, and crashed down onto the decks with a crack, crushing mercenaries and sailors alike. "Ah, get me out of here! Help!" Baron Vane, in his torn silk robe, rolled across the listing poop deck, clutching at a gilded mooring cleat. The next instant, a colossal purple tentacle, studded with razor-sharp bony rings, came down with a dull slap directly onto the stern superstructure. The gilded balustrade, the luxurious furniture, and the Baron himself vanished beneath tons of flesh and salt spray. The Golden Nautilus broke apart completely. The central galleon, holed by Caleb's ram and crushed by the Kraken, plunged to the bottom with a guttural groan, dragging hundreds of tons of plundered gold and supplies down into the abyss with it. Jarl, the privateer's left galleon, is still holding. They're trying to cut the moorings and get away under sail, Bran shouted, straining with all his strength to hold the black driftwood's tiller. Caleb's small schooner, deftly weaving among the floating debris and the flailing, dying tentacles, ran parallel to the collapsing giant. The ship's low profile and total lack of a tall bow structure saved them huge chunks of the Nautilus's mass flew over the schooner's deck without doing her any harm. Caleb stood on the forecastle, his left eye fully filled with the abyss's blackness, pulsed in time with the Kraken's movements. He could feel the juvenile deep-sea monster gorging itself on the fury of battle, but its primitive mind was already beginning to tire of human resistance. On the surviving left galleon, the mercenaries had managed to swing 2 heavy-deck ballistae around and were firing point-blank into the creature's body with enormous iron harpoons, each trailing an empty barrel as a float. The Kraken roared in pain, its tentacles thrashing, gouging deep furrows into the wooden planking. If they kill or drive off the Kraken now, that galleon will get away, Caleb calculated in an instant. It's got more than 40 guns and 200 fresh soldiers aboard. They'll regroup, find our living rafts in the fog, and wipe out our entire clan. Junho could not allow that. In his Korean past, a rescuer fought for every life to the very end. In this harsh new Viking reality of the boundless expanse, saving your own meant utterly destroying your enemy. Torvald, bring the stern culverin around. We need to knock out their steering gear, Caleb ordered, already leaping toward the gun deck. But Jarl, we've only got powder left for 2 shots. Torvald rasped, pouring the last of the black grainy powder into the cannon's muzzle. That's all we'll need. Aim for the rudder chain sprocket under their stern counter. I'll correct the shot through the water. Caleb pressed his palm against the oak rail, closed his eyes, and gave himself over completely to the voice of the abyss. A wave of his mana slid across the water surface, crossed the 100 meters separating them, and reached the underwater section of the retreating galleon. He saw the massive rudder blade, held by thick forged chains. Because of the ship's heavy list, the port rudder chain was stretched taut as a string. Elevation angle 3 degrees down. Correction for pitch half a meter to the right. The engineer's mind produced ready-made ballistic coordinates. Torvald. Now, Caleb shouted. The last culverin of the black driftwood spat flame. The iron ball skimmed just above the water's surface, vanishing into the foaming wake behind the enemy galleon's stern. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened, and then came a deafening, clean ring of overstressed metal snapping. The rudder's iron chain shattered, and the released blade, driven by the rushing current, wrenched violently sideways. The huge privateer galleon, running under full sail, suddenly made a sharp, uncontrolled turn downwind. Her tall stern swung out, and the ship, at full speed, drove straight into one of the granite peaks of the dead reef jutting from the water, the very one they had just been passing. The reef stone fong tore open the galleon's port side effortlessly from bow to midships. Water poured in so fast the ship began visibly heeling over before their eyes. The mercenaries, who only moments before had been celebrating their imminent escape, tumbled screaming over the side. The Kraken, sensing that its main tormentors were defeated and no longer firing harpoons, let out a farewell, guttural whistle. The monster's enormous purple body slid slowly back down into the depths, dragging the remains of the golden Nautilus with it. Within a minute, all that remained on the ocean's surface were vast oil slicks, thousands of floating planks, empty barrels, and hundreds of people thrashing in the water, toward whom the triangular fins of spine-fin sharks had already begun to rise. The fog began to rapidly disperse, giving way to the cold winter sun. The black driftwood slowly approached the site of the disaster. Absolute, ringing silence reigned on the schooner's deck. Bran, Gunnar, Mara, and all the sailors stood frozen, staring at what had become of Baron Vane's once great flotilla, all within the span of a single hour of battle. The 13-year-old boy, their young Jarl, sat on an empty powder barrel, breathing heavily. The blackness in his left eye slowly receded, leaving only a deep, adult exhaustion. From the fog behind them, the two living rafts of the clan of the Dead Reef cautiously emerged. Women and children, clinging to the ropes, stared out at the sea of wreckage with fear and astonishment. They had expected to find their schooner destroyed, but instead found their young leader standing amid the ruins of their bitterest enemy. Do we win? Mara asked quietly, as though not believing her own words, coming up to her brother and sinking to her knees before him. Her hands, stained with powder soot, trembled. Caleb raised his head and looked at the surviving members of his clan. No, Mara, he answered, calm and firm, and his voice carried out over the quieting sea. We didn't just win, we survived. And now this entire sector of the boundless expanse belongs to us. He stood, squaring his shoulders. His new body no longer seemed weak or malnourished. There was a steel will in it now, forged in battle. Bran, Caleb ordered, begin collecting the spoils. Fish out of the water only the barrels of resin, dry powder, grain, and any surviving tools. Take no mercenary prisoners, we don't have fresh water to spare. But if you see slaves from other clans holding onto the wreckage, bring them all aboard. They'll become our new rowers and builders. It will be done, Jarl Caleb. Bran pressed his hand to his chest and rushed off to give orders to the sailors, who now carried out the boy's every command with religious fervor. Gunnar walked up to the schooner's bow and patted the splinter-bloodied underwater ram. By the old gods of the deep, Caleb, your underwater beak worked like a leviathan's fawn. If we'd gone in with the old forecastle, they'd have shot us to pieces before we even got close. This is only the beginning, Gunnar, Caleb answered quietly, gazing into the clear water where, far below, the remains of Baron Vane's gold slowly settled onto the seabed. We need to reinforce the black driftwood. From the wreckage of the left galleon, we'll salvage the guns and sheet iron. We'll plate the hull with it. And then we'll build the first permanent underwater station on the dead shelf. We won't have to run from the storms on the surface anymore. The boy pulled the damp hood of his late father's jacket up over his head. Sunlight glinted in his eyes, one of which still retained a faint golden rim of the system. The clan of the Dead Reef had ceased to be a victim. Under the leadership of Pak Junho, who had taken the name Jarl Caleb, they had taken their first step toward building the greatest underwater fleet this drowned world had ever seen. A month passed. The boundless expanse knew no change of seasons in the familiar earthly sense, but the sea around the Dead Reef had grown noticeably colder. The water had darkened, shifting from an oily gray into a deep, anthracite mass, from which, each morning, a thick mist rose, smelling of iodine and iron. For the clan of the Dead Reef, this month became an era of great transformation. From wandering fugitives doomed to die, they had become masters of these waters. But Junho understood. Their current safety was only an illusion. Baron Vane's death had created an enormous power vacuum. Sooner or later, other merchant barons, or, worse still, the Iron Clan with their armored steam monitors would come to find out what had happened to 3 ships of the line and mountains of gold. So the work never stopped, not for a single hour. The black driftwood now lay moored in a quiet lagoon between the 3 granite peaks, transformed into a floating headquarters and defensive platform. Her sides were no longer simple oak. Using heavy smithing tools and sheet iron stripped from Vane's left galleon, wrecked on the rocks, Gunnar and Torvald, working from Caleb's drawings, plated the schooner in scales. It was composite armor. The first layer was a 2-inch cushion of rope and canvas, soaked in waterproofing mastic to absorb the kinetic energy of projectiles, and above it, 3mm sheets of wrought iron, fastened with through bolts of copper. The ship grew heavier, but Caleb compensated by fully removing the massive stern superstructure and replacing it with a low, streamlined, armored conning tower. But Pak Junho's main project wasn't the schooner. His attention was fixed downward toward the flat granite slab, 12 meters deep, joining the bases of the three peaks. The dead shelf. Caleb, the people are exhausted, Mara said, entering the captain's cabin, which by now looked more like a drafting office. Dozens of sheets of parchment lay on the table, weighted down with rusty gears and harpoon tips instead of paperweights. We've already pulled 40 people out of the water from the wreckage. The women are boiling fish glue around the clock. The boys never come out of the diving bells. Bran says half the divers already have aching joints. Caleb raised his head from a sketch of a primitive hand-cranked air compressor. His 13-year-old face was gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze remained clear and frighteningly focused. The joints ache because of nitrogen bubbles in the blood, he answered calmly. They're surfacing too fast. I told Bran already. After working at depth, the bell needs to be held at the 5-meter mark for at least 15 minutes. Write that on the board by the winch, Mara, in big letters. Whoever breaks it goes without their evening ration of fresh water. Mara sighed, but nodded obediently. She could see that her brother's severity wasn't cruelty, it was the sole reason their clan was still alive and fed. Thanks to Caleb, they no longer went hungry. From the flooded holds of the Golden Nautilus, they had raised dozens of barrels of salted meat, hardtack, and, most importantly, crates of light crystals, a rare deep resource that served as electricity here. "What's this?" she asked, pointing to a new drawing. It showed an enormous octagonal cylinder, assembled from thick oak beams and bound with massive iron hoops. At the top of the cylinder was mounted a copper hemisphere with round glass portholes. "This is Shelter 1, Caleb pulled the drawing closer. "Our first underwater station. We finished assembling the hull on the rafts. Tomorrow morning, we start sinking it." "Sinking it?" Mara's eyes went wide with alarm. "Why would we sink something we spent a whole month building?" "So we can live there." Caleb stood and walked to the cabin's narrow porthole, looking out at the dark water. "On the surface, we're vulnerable. Any storm can smash our rafts against the reefs. Any privateer fleet can shell us from a distance. But underwater, at 12 meters, there are no storms. There are no cannons. Down there, we'll be safe. This cylinder will be lowered onto the dead shelf. We'll anchor it with heavy stone weights, pump the water out, and feed air inside. It will become a dry, livable room for 12 people. A forge, a powder store, and a repair station." At that moment, there came a short, hard knock on the cabin door. Bran appeared in the doorway. His single eye gleamed feverishly, water dripping from his wet beard. "Jarl Caleb, you need to see this," the bosun said hoarsely. "At the 7th bell, we ran into something down there. It's not one of Vane's ships. It was there long before us." Half an hour later, Caleb was standing on the deck of the repair raft. Above the water hung a modernized diving bell, no longer a mere wine barrel, but a sturdy steel capsule with thick observation windows, fashioned from the Nautilus's smelting cauldron. Air was fed into it not by leather bellows, but by a 2-cylinder piston pump that Gunnar had built from copper pipes, according to Caleb's drawings. 13 meters deep, right at the base of the eastern peak, Bran pointed to a taut cable. "The boys were clearing bottom sediment to set a marker buoy for your underwater station, and their shovels struck metal. But it's not iron, Caleb. It's green gold, or bronze, but it hasn't rusted." Caleb didn't waste time with questions. Throwing a heavy leather-weighted vest over his shoulders and cinching his belt with a rescue knife, he climbed inside the steel capsule. "Lower away, Bran. Steady. And keep the pump at a constant rate," he ordered. The capsule plunged into the water. The blackness of the boundless expanse closed instantly overhead. Through the thick portholes, Caleb watched phosphorescent threads of deep-sea siphonophores drift past. His voice of the abyss responded at once with a familiar low hum. But in that hum, there was now a new, strange note, clear, vibrating like the ring of a tuning fork. The capsule settled softly onto the sandy bottom. Light from 2 light crystals fixed to the outside of the bell cut through the darkness. Caleb pressed against the glass. In front of him lay a pit his sailors had dug. From the gray bottom, silt jutted a colossal, rounded segment of some structure. It was dark, greenish-black patinated bronze, covered in ancient, deeply carved runes. But the geometry of this object was utterly atypical for this half-wild world. Perfect radius. Absolutely even rivets. This was part of an enormous, pressure-resistant hull, a submarine, or a deep-sea bathyscaphe from an ancient era, from a time when this world was not yet fully submerged, or when human technology had stood at its peak. Caleb closed his eyes and pressed his palm against the bell's steel plating, sending his mana down through the water, straight to the ancient metal. Warning: resonance detected with an ancient artifact. Autonomous research module, class Triton, object status, mothballed. Pressure hull integrity, 78%. Power core depleted, engineering, scan available. Do you wish to copy the available blueprints to the system database? Junho's heart skipped a beat. The engineer skewer's mind instantly visualized the structure of the object hidden beneath the silt. It was not merely a vessel, it was a cylindrical underwater craft, roughly 20 meters long. Its stern held the outline of propulsion pods, and inside were automated life support systems, high-pressure ballast tanks, and drive mechanisms machined with incredible precision. There it is, Caleb thought, a predatory smile spreading across his face. There's my technological leap. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. The ancients already built it all. I just need to raise it and get it running. But raising a 20-ton hulk from the seabed with hemp ropes and hand winches was impossible. The ropes would simply snap, and men would tear their backs apart. This called for a different approach, the Archimedes method, taken to perfection. Caleb pulled twice on the signal rope. The capsule rose. We climbed out onto the raft's deck. Bran and Gunnar were watching him impatiently. What's down there, Jarl? Gold of the ancients? Weapons? Better. Caleb wiped his face with a towel. There's an underwater ship of the ancients down there, made of metal that doesn't rot in water, and we're going to raise it. But how? Gunnar threw up his hands. Our strongest winch would break. Try to lift even a third of that monster. We don't need winches, Gunnar. Caleb turned to the oak structure of Shelter 1, standing nearby, which they had planned to sink tomorrow. We're changing the plan. We're not just going to sink the station for nothing. We're turning it into a lifting pontoon. The men's ears pricked up. Listen closely. Caleb picked up a piece of charcoal and began sketching a diagram right there on the raft's deck. We tow Shelter 1 out over the exact spot of the find. We'll flood it halfway, so it sinks under the surface. Then our divers in the bells will lower 4 heavy chains from Vane's galleon down and wrap them around the ancient vessel's hull. We'll fasten the other ends of the chains to our wooden station. And then we'll start pumping air into Shelter 1 with our compressor. The air will drive the water out of the oak cylinder. Do you know what happens then? Buoyant force. Torvald whispered, having started, over the past month, to grasp a bit of Caleb's terminology. Exactly. A huge wooden cylinder, filled with air underwater, will generate a colossal lifting force tens of tons. It will float up on its own and drag the ancient ship out of the silt, like a cork out of a bottle. It's called pontoon salvage. Bran slapped his thigh in delight. By the abyss, that's brilliant. With pulling out metal. We have a day to prepare. Caleb turned serious. Securing the chains is the most dangerous part. We'll have to work right on the bottom. And remember, the noise of the chains might draw more than sharks. The Kraken's gone, but the deep is full of other creatures. Torvald, ready all the remaining muskets and load them with resin-tipped explosive rounds. Bran, put your most reliable men on the winches. We're starting the salvage of the century. The next day passed in a state of the most brutal tension. The great oak octagon of the underwater station was towed out to the center of the lagoon. Under Caleb's direction, water was poured into its lower scuppers, and the structure, with a heavy sigh, sank beneath the surface, left hanging from the schooner's mooring lines 2 meters below the surface. It had become a gigantic float. Caleb himself went down to the bottom 3 times. He had to draw on the full concentration of his voice of the abyss to calm the bottom crustaceans and small predators swarming around the excavated pit. The ancient metal seemed to vibrate, calling the creatures of the dark toward it. By the second afternoon, from massive ships chains had been passed beneath the belly of the ancient Triton. The ends of the chains were fixed fast with stoppers on the upper deck of the submerged oak pontoon. Already, Bran shouted from the raft, with a hand-cranked air compressor stood. For sailors gripped the long wooden piston handles. "Begin pumping," Caleb ordered. The handles moved up and down. With a dull, rhythmic thud, air rushed through the thick hoses into the submerged wooden shelter. At first, nothing happened. A minute, 5, 10. The sailors were already drenched in sweat, trading off every 3 minutes. The tension mounted. Had Caleb's calculations been wrong? Would the wood fail to hold the pressure? Suddenly, the water in the center of the lagoon began to foam. Enormous bubbles of air started breaking the surface. "It's holding. The ropes are taut as strings." "Gud no skytet." A heavy, groaning sound rose from the bottom of the lagoon. The centuries-old silt did not want to release its prize. The ancient bronze hull of the Triton began, reluctantly, centimeter by centimeter, to tear free of the granite slab. The oak pontoon, filling with air, surged irresistibly upward, dragging the multi-ton hulk of the ancients up with it. "More! Pump! You sons of bitches, more!" Bran roared, throwing his own weight onto the compressor lever. And then the water in the lagoon literally exploded. With a colossal splash, the purple crown of the oak underwater station burst to the surface first. And right behind it, wreathed in clouds of ancient mud and seaweed, rose the smooth, predatory back of the bronze underwater craft. It was magnificent. Despite the centuries spent on the seabed, its dark green hull bore not a single trace of rust. The shape of the hull resembled an elongated teardrop. At the bow, ports for some kind of weapons or manipulators were visible, sealed shut by armored shutters. At the stern, massive three-bladed propellers of an unknown alloy sat frozen and still. The sailors and women on the rafts froze in mute wonder. They stared at this marvel of engineering as though a living god of the deep had appeared before them. Caleb walked to the edge of the raft and leapt lightly onto the wet bronze back of the salvaged vessel. He made his way to the bow section, where a massive round hatch with a rotating wheel was set. Pressing his palm to the wheel, he closed his eyes. The system within his mind instantly produced a cascade of symbols. Object, autonomous module Triton, successfully raised to the surface residual charge detected in emergency batteries. 1.2% user identification. Warning. Compatible abyssal mana signature detected. Status assigned. Captain, do you wish to open the airlock hatch? Open it, Caleb said quietly aloud. Something clicked inside the ancient mechanism, hissing as it released a jet of compressed air that smelled of ozone and dry, frozen ages. The heavy bronze wheel turned half a rotation on its own, and the hatch swung slowly back, opening onto a dark, inviting interior. Caleb turned to face his crew. Bran, Gunnar, and Mara looked at him, holding their breath. They understood that from this moment on, the history of the clan of the Dead Reef would split into a before and an after. They were no longer simply pirates or survivors clinging to rotting planks. In their hands now lay the keys to the secrets of the ocean itself. Bran, Gunnar, Torvald with me. Caleb was the first to descend through the hatch opening, dissolving into the technological darkness of the ancient vessel. It's time to learn how those who once ruled this world before the Great Flood used to wage war. Inside the ancient ship, the air smelled of ozone, dry plastic, and stale, cold air that had known no human breath for centuries. When Caleb dropped down the ladder rungs onto the metal deck, his boots made a resonant, clean sound. There was no dampness here. The pressure hull of the ancients had held its seal perfectly. Bran, Gunnar, and Torvald descended after him, gripping axes and torches tightly. But the flame of the torches seemed foreign and dim in this place. "By the 3 fins, Jarl. It's smooth as the inside of a whale's skull," Bran whispered, warily touching a finger to a mat wall webbed with silvery, thread-thin filigree, fine as spider silk. Caleb didn't answer. His left eye picked up a faint, barely perceptible blue glow emanating from those filaments. This was not mere wiring, these were mana conduits, through which concentrated abyssal energy had once circulated. The entire geometry of the Triton's interior followed strict ergonomics. A central passage led from the forward control section through a berthing compartment to a massive shielded pylon in the stern. Warning: the captain is present at the central command post critical energy level. Life support systems running in emergency mode. Full integration requires replacement or recharge of the mana core. Caleb reached the commander's couch, a massive chair of dark polymer, in front of which stood a semicircle of dead crystalline control panels. In place of familiar wheels and levers, there were only smooth hemispheres shaped for the hands, built for a direct neuromagical interface. Gunnar, Torvald, put out the torches, Caleb ordered. They're burning up the oxygen, and the ventilation hasn't been started yet. Bring me those 3 top-grade light crystals we took from Baron Vane's cabin. The Cocker climbed the ladder quickly and returned a couple of minutes later, cradling against his chest the heavy, cut, transparent crystal clusters, glowing dimly with an inner azure fire. The privateers had used these crystals as extravagant lamps, but Junho, with his engineer's eye, recognized their true nature at once. These were natural, piezo-magical accumulators. This world's stabilized batteries. Where do they go, Jarl? Torvald asked. Caleb walked to the central pylon in the stern compartment. On it sat a round lock with 3 deep slots, perfectly sized to fit the crystals. The ancients had designed their modules to be able to use the deep's standard power sources in the event of an emergency. Here, Caleb took the first crystal. A thin thread of black abyssal mana streamed from his palm, activating the structure of the stone. The crystal flared with blinding blue light. Caleb, straining, drove it into the first slot. The walls of the Triton answered with a low, vibrating hum. The silver filaments on the walls swelled with neon light. Second one, Caleb ordered. When the third crystal settled into place, the pylon rotated, sealing the batteries inside an armored housing. A hissing sound swept through the whole ship. The air regeneration compressors had come online. The command panels in the forward compartment lit up in cascades of runic symbols and engineering graphs, which the system instantly translated in Caleb's mind into his native Korean. Power circuit stabilized. Charge, 34% system diagnostics initiated. Ballast tanks operational. Maneuvering propellers operational. Auxiliary weapon Thunder Pulse requires calibration. Available autonomous operating time. 48 hours. Bran and Gunnar dropped to their knees, covering their faces with their hands. To them, this sudden light and these mechanisms coming to life were a pure manifestation of divine power. Get up, Caleb said without turning around, his palms already resting on the control hemispheres. He felt the ship become an extension of his own body. Through the Triton's external sensors, he saw the lagoon of the dead reef, the schooner rocking on the surface, and the frightened faces of the people on the rafts. These aren't gods. It's just iron, obeying the laws of reason. And now it's our home. He opened his eyes. On the control panel, a red runic icon blinked, signaling the approach of a large object from the north. The voice of the abyss confirmed the signal. 5 miles from the reef, cutting confidently through the waves, a foreign fleet was bearing down on them. The vibrations were heavy, rhythmic, accompanied by the characteristic thud of pistons. The Iron Clan, Caleb said grimly, tightening his fingers on the hemispheres. They worked out fast where Vane disappeared to. Bran, get topside. Sound the alarm on the schooner. Have Mara take the living rafts deep into the rock crevasses. And you, Jarl? The bosun looked at the boy with devoted eyes. I'm going to test this ship in battle. We take the fight where no one expects us. Underwater, Caleb drew the mental control levers toward himself. The Triton's hatch hissed shut above, locking with triple bolts. Seawater rushed into the ballast tanks with a heavy gurgle. The ancient bronze specter slid slowly, without a single splash, back into its native darkness, leaving the ocean's surface clear. A new era of underwater warfare had begun. The water beyond the Triton's observation ports darkened rapidly, shifting from azure to a thick, almost tangible midnight blue. Caleb sat in the command couch, eyes half closed. The ancient's neuromagical interface worked flawlessly. His consciousness pack, Junho's, enriched by the voice of the abyss, now extended far beyond the sturdy bronze hull. He could feel the hydrodynamic resistance of every frame, the smooth rotation of the stern propellers, the density of the water outside. Depth 10 meters. Trim 0. Proceeding at slow speed, Caleb said quietly. Gunnar and Torvald, left in the control compartment, gripped the iron handrails convulsively. Their faces were pale, their eyes a mixture of wild elation and primal terror. They were the first people of their clan to willingly go down into the deep without being chained as slaves. Warning: targets on the surface closing. Distance: 1.5 miles. System object identification. Iron Clan steam monitors 2 units. Flagship armored corvette 1 unit heavy. Rhythmic blows carried through the mass of water. These were not the beat of oars, nor the snap of sails. This was the predatory, mechanical thud of enormous steam pistons and the slap of paddle wheels. The Iron Clan, the technological maniacs of the boundless expanse, had arrived to claim their share. Caleb brought up a tactical projection on the crystalline panel. On the surface, above them, 3 silhouettes moved. Their draft was colossal because of heavy belt armor. They advanced in tight formation, ready to burn out the dead reef with their deck mortars and steam cannons. They expected to find here the remnants of Vane's privateers or docile savages on rafts. They did not know that death was already waiting beneath their keels. Jarl Caleb, Torvald swallowed, staring at the blinking red runes. What do? We don't have any guns that can punch through their iron bellies from above. We don't need ordinary guns, Torvald. Caleb shifted his palms slightly on the control hemispheres. The Triton smoothly banked into a sharp turn, coming up on the first steam monitor exactly at its stern, beneath its vulnerable paddle wheel. We're going to use the laws of physics and the weapons of the ancients. Calibration of the Thunder Pulse module is complete. Weapon: Thunder Pulse, high-pressure pneumatic cannon, ready TO, fire current accumulator pressure. 180 atmospheres. This weapon did not fire powder or shot. It used compressed air and concentrated kinetic abyssal mana energy, producing a directed hydraulic shock of colossal force. Underwater, such an impulse acted like an invisible sledgehammer striking metal. Target locked, Caleb whispered. His left eye flared for a second with the system's pure gold. Range 30 meters. Below the waterline. Fire. He mentally pulled the trigger. The Triton shuddered slightly. Massive shutters on the bow snapped open, and from them burst a colossal, almost invisible bubble of compressed energy. The water between the submarine and the Iron Clan monitor instantly seethed. The sound of the underwater blast was short and terrible. The kinetic pulse crossed the distance at the speed of sound and slammed directly into the monitor's right paddle wheel and its wheelhouse. The enemy ship's iron plating, never designed to withstand a directed dynamic blow from below, buckled inward, bursting along its rivet seams. The enormous, multi-ton cast-iron paddle wheel tore free of its axle and, spinning wildly, plunged toward the bottom, narrowly missing the Triton's own hull. Chaos broke out on the surface. Columns of white superheated steam shot up from the monitor's portholes. The water hammer had crushed the internal steam lines and ruptured the boilers. The ship instantly lost way and began listing to starboard, wreathed in clouds of smoke. -1, Caleb noted coldly, taking the Triton down to 15 meters to avoid any blind return fire. The second monitor is trying to turn. The flagship corvette is increasing speed. By all the sharks, this is the magic of the ancients. Gunnar laughed wildly, pounding his fist against the bulkhead. They don't even know where it came from. They're fighting the sea itself. Too soon to relax. Caleb cut him off. The Iron Clan's flagship is dropping depth charges into the water. They suspect something. Through the upper sensors, Caleb watched black barrels wrapped in heavy chains begin tumbling off the stern of the great armored corvette. These were crude but dangerous powder mines with galvanic detonators. If one of those barrels caught the Triton's hull, 30% shield charge from the ancients might not be enough. Torvald reversed the maneuvering propellers. Caleb ordered, "We're pulling into the shadow of the eastern peak. Let their minds hit granite." The Triton showed off wonders of maneuverability. Her streamlined hull, born of a departed age's genius, slid between the underwater rocks of the dead reef like a living leviathan. The black mine barrels detonated behind them, shaking the water and stirring up tons of silt from the bottom. But the shock waves broke harmlessly against the submarine's hull. Caleb bided his time. He knew the ironclad's coal and mana reserves weren't endless. The monitors were powerful in open water, but here, among the granite teeth of the reef, which Pak Junho had studied down to the last inch, they were blind giants. When the flagship corvette, groping for its enemy, drew too close to an underwater outcrop, Caleb activated the voice of the abyss at full power. But he did not aim the pulse at the ship. He aimed it at the multi-ton granite overhang of the eastern peak looming above the water, which had already been barely holding on since the recent storm. The ultrasonic resonance wave struck the crack in the rock. Thousands of tons of ancient granite crashed down with a deafening roar from a height of 30 meters, straight onto the deck of the passing armored corvette. The ironclad flagship's heavy iron armor crumpled like foil under the weight of the falling rock. The ship was literally snapped in half and driven under the waves. The last surviving ironclad monitor, seeing the destruction of its flagship and the inexplicable loss of its first sister ship, chose not to tempt fate further. Firing a furious salvo from every deck gun into nothing in particular, it sounded its sirens and, at maximum paddle wheel speed, fled north. The water in the dead reef lagoon grew calm once more. Only rising air bubbles and oil slicks remained as a reminder that the elite of the Iron Clan had just been annihilated here. Caleb smoothly moved the control lever to surface. The ballast tanks hissed as they blew the remaining compressed air. The Triton's bronze back sliced through the lagoon surface, and the hatch popped open with a click. On the deck of the black driftwood, and on the rafts, a deafening roar went up. The clan of the Dead Reef was celebrating its victory. Mara, standing on the schooner's forecastle with a spyglass, watched her 13-year-old brother emerge from the hatch as though he were a legendary seafaring king out of the old tales. Caleb raised his hand, calling for silence. His face was pale with mana exhaustion, but his eyes burned with an engineer's triumph. "We held them off," he said loudly. "But they'll come back, and next time there will be more of them. So our plan stays the same. Today we begin mounting Shelter 1 on the dead shelf. Now we have guns from the wrecked ironclad ships and their coal. We're not just going to build a base. We're going to build an underwater fortress." Junho looked at the system panel, which displayed a new notification. "Congratulations. First underwater victory achieved. Your synchronization level with the Triton has increased to 45% access unlocked. Ancient blueprint category, mechanically driven deep-sea diving suits. The story of the clan of the Dead Reef was only just beginning. And this drowned world had no idea yet what a Korean rescue worker, armed with the technology of a fallen civilization, was capable of. Sealing Bran into the diving suit took a long 15 minutes. Gunnar hammered heavy copper pins into the collar slots with loud blows, while Torvald furiously tightened the bolts on the joints, sealing the seams with thick leather that smelled of tar and wax. When the helmet finally locked into place, Bran, inside Diver 1, let out a guttural roar, testing the actuators. The mechanical arms shifted with a grinding screech. The suit lurched forward, its flat lead soles slapping heavily against the station's decking. Into its right mechanical claw, Torvald placed a heavy piston rifle, a homemade underwater shotgun that fired chopped iron shot using compressed air from a tank. Caleb didn't put on the cumbersome suit. His 13-year-old body, strengthened by the system, already possessed excess endurance, and the voice of the abyss created an invisible barrier around him, partially compensating for the pressure. He took only his father's bone cutter and the Iron Clan's short steam pistol. "Gunnar, Torvald, stay on the pump. Keep pumping air into Bran's suit without stopping. If the pressure drops, he'll be crushed inside that copper, Caleb instructed. They exited through Shelter 1's airtight lock, not into open water, but into a narrow, dark fissure in the granite rock that the sailors had cut 3 days earlier to run cables to the Triton. The water here was icy and still. The only source of light was the 3 viewports on Bran's helmet, cutting dim yellow beams through the age-old darkness. The pounding inside the rock grew louder. The creature was very close. Caleb swam ahead, smoothly pulling himself along the rocky walls. His left eye had turned fully coal-black, picking up the enemy's heat and mana pulsations. Ahead, the wall of the fissure broke off sharply, opening onto the entrance of that very underground cavity, a gigantic grotto, half filled with compressed air and gray foam reeking of hydrogen sulfide. Half in the water, half on the slick rocks, it writhed. Stone borer nesting queen rank D, plus the creature looked like a cross between a giant centipede and a blind deep-sea worm, about 6 meters long. Its body was covered in a layer of chitinous plates thick as armor, fused with chunks of granite and shell. In place of a head, the queen had a colossal round maw, set with 3 rows of rotating horny teeth, which had ground against the rock, literally grinding stone into gray dust. Dozens of small, half-meter larvae swarmed around it. Hearing the heavy grinding of Bran's suit, the queen spun around sharply. From its maw burst a whistling, ultrasonic jet of filthy water that made Caleb's ears ring. Bran fired its eyes, or wherever they're supposed to be. Caleb ordered mentally through the voice of the abyss. The bosun, inside his copper armor, reacted instantly. The heavy piston rifle jerked in the mechanical manipulator. Underwater, the shot sounded like a dull, dense bell strike. A dense cloud of iron shot cut down the small larvae and slammed point-blank into the queen's snout. The horny plates around its maw shattered into splinters, spraying thick, phosphorescent green blood. The queen roared in pain and, thrashing its many-legged body furiously, lunged at the copper intruder. Its enormous armored tail slammed hard into the chest plate of Diver 1. The suit's metal buckled inward. Bran flew backward with a groan, slamming his back hard against the grotto's granite wall. One of the air hoses on his left shoulder burst, and precious air bubbles hissed out of it. Pressure's dropping. Jarl, I'm getting crushed. Bran rasped into the speaking tube. Not on my watch, Pak Junho thought angrily. Caleb kicked off the rock sharply, activating the system at maximum. Warning. Skill used. Abyssal dash mana cost. 15 units. Underwater movement speed increased by 200%. He shot through the water like a black arrow, streaking past the queen's flailing tendrils. In the air pocket of the grotto, springing out onto a slick stone ledge, Caleb raised the ironclad steam pistol and fired point-blank into the creature's maw, already torn open by Bran's shot. Superheated steam and an armor-piercing bolt drove deep into the worm's gullet. The queen's insides convulsed. The creature reared up spasmodically, exposing its unprotected belly, where clutches of eggs showed through the thin skin. Caleb, dropping from above, plunged his bone cutter coated in Torvald's poison mastic straight into the monster's soft tissue, slicing it open from chest to tail. Boiling green blood drenched the rocks. The worm convulsed several times and went still, collapsing heavily into the water. Creature's Stone Borer Queen, destroyed received. 450 system experience points, rare resource detected. Borer Incubation Core. 1 unit used to craft ancient drilling attachments. Caleb breathed heavily, kneeling on the armored corpse. His 13-year-old arms trembled from the strain, but the system was already pumping new energy into his veins from the level gained. He quickly dove into the water toward Bran's suit. Pressing his palm against the bosun's damaged air hose, he channeled a stream of mana, temporarily sealing the breach with a dense clot of black abyssal energy. The bubble stopped. Bran breathed. Breathe steady, he ordered. Gunnar's already pulling us back in. By all the sea devils, came the bosun's broken but living voice from inside the helmet. We did it, Jarl. We ate that worm. Half an hour later, back in the dry, warm compartment of Shelter 1, Gunnar and Torvald, tears in their eyes, helped Bran climb out of his dented copper shell. A fearsome dent marred the suit's chest plate, but the ancient's sturdy housing, cobbled together as it was, had held against the blow. Caleb set the glowing bluish core, extracted from the worm's gut and covered in tough horny growths that could scratch granite with ease, down on the workbench. Gunnar, forget ordinary drill bits. Caleb looked at the old craftsman. With this core and the Triton's blueprints, we're going to build a mechanical drill. We're not just going to sit inside this rock. We're going to carve out a dry underground dock inside the eastern peak for our submarine. Our fleet will be based inside the mountain itself, and no ship on the surface will ever know where we're hiding. Gunnar looked at the core, then at Caleb, and in his eyes lit that same mad engineer's fire that had once driven June Ho himself in his past life. It'll be done, my Jarl, the carpenter said quietly. We'll crack this reef open like an oyster. Another month and a half passed. The clan of the Dead Reef's trajectory had shifted decisively underwater. The granite peaks, which for centuries had served only as a graveyard for merchant ships, were now becoming the boundless expanse's first-ever hidden naval base. Using the trophy Stoneborer incubation core, Gunnar and Torvald wrought an engineering marvel. They assembled a huge rotary drilling head, powered by a transmission shaft off the steam engine of a wrecked ironclad monitor. The heavy piston assembly, greedily devouring choice anthracite, thundered day and night in the underground grotto, cutting a passage into the very heart of the eastern peak. Caleb personally coordinated every stage of the work. His mind, enriched with the knowledge of modern Korean engineering and ballistics, calculated the stress points of the rock with unerring precision. Where ordinary tunnelers would have risked a collapse, Caleb ordered arch shoring built from the melted-down gun barrels of privateer ships. The result of this labor was the dry dock Citadel 1. It was a colossal cavern, 40 meters long, cut into solid granite. From below, it connected to the ocean through a curved underwater tunnel, positioned 15 meters deep at precisely the angle that ruled out detection from the surface, even in the calmest weather. Inside, the dock was fitted with a system of counterweights and lock gates, allowing the chamber to be fully drained or flooded within 20 minutes. The Triton now stood on wooden slipways in the center of this dry dock. The ancient bronze hull had been fully cleared of centuries-old silt, its energy mana conduits reworked by Caleb's own hands. Jarl Caleb, messengers have arrived from the distant rafts of the Otter clan, Mara said, entering the dry dock, her wet leather boots slapping against the granite floor. Over the course of these underground works, she had visibly grown up, having traded her girlish dress for a sturdy jacket of sea beast leather and a bandolier of throwing knives. They say the barons are convening a grand council to the north at the trade crossroads. Caleb, standing on the Triton's upper plating with a wrench in his hands, turned around. A council? Regarding what? Officially to discuss new quotas for the salt and slave trade. But our spies among the rafts whisper that the Iron Clan is furious over the loss of their monitors. They're blaming it all on the ghost of the Dead Reef. Baron Crass, the wealthiest of the northern rulers, has put out a bounty of 10,000 gold lire for the head of whoever destroyed Vane's flotilla. They're coming here, Caleb. This time they won't send patrol boats. They're sending a full armor division. 8 heavy steam frigates. Caleb calmly climbed down the rope ladder to the dock floor. His face, smeared with fuel oil and coal dust, remained utterly impassive. 8 frigates is serious, he said, wiping his hands with a rag. In open water, they'd simply grind our surface rafts to splinters with their artillery. But they're thinking in the terms of the old world. They believe the war happens only on the surface, where the wind blows and the coal burns. He walked to the drafting table, where, beside the dock plans, lay a new crystalline schematic copied from the system's database. Upgrade available from Module Triton. Integration of ancient torpedo tubes required materials. 400 kilograms refined copper, 50 kilograms ironclad gunpowder, 8 mid-rank light crystals for guidance systems current assembly status. 90% Gunner, Caleb called loudly. The old carpenter's grease-stained face poked out from behind the submarine's stern. Yes, my Jarl. How many cigars are ready? 6 of them, Caleb. All exactly as you asked. Copper casings, 40 pounds of dry ironclad powder inside each, and that hydrostatic detonator of yours in the nose. Torvald personally checked the seal on every seam in the mastic bath. They won't leak. Gunnar called the first prototypes of self-propelled underwater shells torpedoes cigars. Of course, the Clan of the Dead Reef had no way of building the complex gyroscopic instruments of 20th century Earth, but Caleb worked around that limitation using the system and this world's magic. Inside each torpedo was mounted a small, deep crystal, which Caleb programmed through the voice of the abyss. This crystal reacted to the magnetic field and heat vibrations of surface ships' boilers, serving as a crude but damnably effective homing head. Excellent. Caleb turned to Mara. Tell the Otter Clan's messengers. Let them go back and tell the barons that the Clan of the Dead Reef acknowledges their power and is prepared to send its Jarl to the Grand Council to pay tribute. Mara flinched, not trusting her ears. What? You want to surrender to them, Caleb? After everything we've built? After we destroyed Vane? Caleb walked up to his sister and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. For a second, his left eye flashed with the deep, terrifying abyss of the ocean. Our clan will never pay tribute again, Mara. A rescuer doesn't surrender to a storm, he uses its power. We'll come to their council, but not on a schooner under a white flag. We'll come underwater, and when all the barons gather on their luxurious flagships in a single harbor, we'll cut off every head of this hydra at once. He turned to face the Triton, standing frozen on the slipways. Torvald, Bran, begin flooding the dock. We're going out for sea trials with a full weapons load. It's time to show this drowned world that the ocean has a new apex predator. With a deafening screech, the outer lock gates opened, and the churning black water of the boundless expanse roared into the dry dock, lifting the ancient ship's bronze body to meet its first true war. The trade crossroads greeted them with false glitter and the choking smell of smoke. This gigantic floating city, sprawled at the meeting point of 3 warm ocean currents, was the beating heart of commerce and vice in the boundless expanse. Hundreds of living rafts, deck barges, and the merchant baron's luxurious pleasure yachts were linked together by rope bridges and floating walkways, forming concentric rings around the central citadel, the Island of Barons. At the very center of the harbor, rocking lazily on the mirror-smooth water, stood the pride of the Iron Clan, 8 heavy steam frigates of the Armored Division. Their tall black smokestacks belched flakes of oily coal soot into the clear sky, while the polished bronze muzzles of their deck mortars pointed in every direction, a display of industrial might's absolute dominance over the savagery of the deep. Aboard the flagship, the 3-decked, ironclad Emperor class, there was a bustle of activity. In the Great Hall, paneled in rare red timber salvaged from submerged prehistoric forests, the Grand Council was in session. The Clan of the Dead Reef is nothing but petty coastal vermin. Baron Crass thundered, a heavy-set man in a uniform with gold epaulettes, gripping a goblet of wine. They only destroyed Vane because that old boar had gone soft on luxury and forgotten what discipline meant. But the Iron Clan does not forgive losses. Our division will grind their rocks to dust the moment this council ends. The other barons nodded in agreement, rustling silk handkerchiefs and maps, carving up new slave territories. They felt utterly safe behind a wall of steel hulls and hundreds of cannon. They had no idea that at this very moment, directly beneath the keel of the Emperor Crass, at a depth of 35 meters, in eternal darkness and cold, a bronze ghost was gliding silently. In the Triton's central command post, only a dim blue combat readiness light burned. Caleb sat in the control couch, his face pale from extreme mental concentration. Through the ancient's neurointerface and the voice of the abyss, he could feel, almost like a physical sensation, the vibration of 8 enormous propellers and idling boilers on the surface above. Targets assigned, Caleb said quietly. His left eye had become a bottomless well of blackness, reflecting the system's tactical schematics. Bran, Torvald, check the torpedo tubes. Tubes 1 and 2 cigars armed, Jarl. Bran's muffled voice came from inside his dented but upgraded suit. A direct speaking tube now ran from his shoulder to the conning tower. Mastic detonators are dry. Guidance crystals are singing. They can smell the heat of the enemy furnaces. 3 and 4 ready, Torvald reported, gripping the manual launch levers. Caleb constructed a perfect ballistic fan in his mind. Because of the Iron Clan frigate's tight formation, he wouldn't need to maneuver for each shot individually. They stood in the harbor like targets on a shooting range, hull to hull. Warning: heat signatures locked. 8 objects hit probability at current formation density. 94% Triton mana core charge. 82%. Air supply stable. We won't negotiate with those who see us as slaves. Caleb gripped the control hemispheres, and his voice echoed low through every compartment of the submarine. Bran, tubes 1 and 2 fire. Torvald, tubes 3 and 4 fire. The ship shuddered perceptibly. For copper torpedoes shot out of the Triton's bow ports with the dull hiss of compressed air. The light crystals inside the shells, activated by Caleb's mana, instantly caught the powerful acoustic and heat vibrations of the steam engines above, trailing thin streams of fine bubbles. The torpedoes surged upward along shallow, ascending paths. Pak Jun-ho didn't wait to see the results of the first salvo. He sharply reversed the maneuvering propellers, taking the Triton down to a depth of 40 meters and banking hard toward the exit of the lagoon. The rescuer inside him knew. Hull was about to break loose on the surface, and the inertia of sinking steel colossi could easily crush his small vessel. On the deck of the Emperor Crass, an Iron Clan watch officer spat lazily over the side, gazing idly into the harbor's clear water. Suddenly his eye caught strange, fast-approaching white streaks rising from the depths. "What in the—" he managed to say. The first explosion literally tore open the flagship ironclad's belly. 40 pounds of choice powder, its force amplified by the confined water and the hydrostatic detonator's shaped charge effect, easily breached the Emperor's armor belt. The starboard boiler detonated instantly. A column of superheated steam, fire, and cast-iron debris punched straight through 3 decks, hurling the Grand Council's great hall along with Baron Crass and his guests 10 stories into the sky. Before lookouts on the other frigates could raise the alarm, the harbor shook 3 more times. The second and third torpedoes struck the stern compartments of 2 neighboring monitors point blank, instantly destroying their steering mechanisms and flooding their engine rooms. The fourth cigar, retargeted by its guidance crystal onto the largest heat source, slammed into the 4th frigate's coal bunker. A colossal fire broke out, spreading in a chain reaction to the powder magazines. In the span of a mere 90 seconds, the pride of the Iron Clan's armor division became blazing, sinking ruins. The great iron hulks of the ships, stripped of their buoyancy, listed, collided with one another, and with a terrible howl of tearing metal, sank to the bottom of the Trade Crossroads harbor, dragging panicking mercenaries down with them. The Baron's floating city froze in indescribable horror. Thousands of pirates, traders, and slaves stared in fear at the churning black water that had just effortlessly swallowed an invincible armada. Not a single enemy sail had appeared on the water. Not a single shot had come from the horizon. Death had come from within the ocean itself. At a depth of 40 meters, Caleb smoothly leveled off the Triton's course. A new notification flared on his system's crystalline panel. Warning: Iron Clan flagship fleet destroyed received. 2,500 experience points. Your system level has increased. Warning: your world reputation has changed. Ghost of the deep fear and dread among the merchant barons access unlocked. Ancient technologies, rank 2, mana acoustic sonar, and bottom minefields. Junho opened his eyes, the blackness slowly receding, restoring his familiar gaze. He looked at Bran and Torvald, sitting on the floor of the command post, breathing hard from the rush of what they just lived through. Coming about, Caleb ordered, quiet but firm. Back to the citadel. Tomorrow the barons will come crawling to the dead reef themselves. But this time, we'll be the ones setting the terms. The bronze Triton turned smoothly and dissolved into the vast, dark depths of the boundless expanse, leaving the wreckage of the old order behind. News of the rout at the crossroads swept across the boundless expanse like a tsunami. In a single night, a balance of power built over decades collapsed to the seafloor along with the Iron Clan's armored hulks. Fear of the unknown monster, the ghost of the deep, gripped the merchant barons. Those who, only yesterday, had been planning to grind the dead reef to dust, now feverishly reinforced their floating residences and prayed to the old gods of the ocean. Meanwhile, in the dry dock Citadel 1, an entirely different constructive kind of work was underway. Pak Jun-ho had no intention of resting on his laurels. His ray system level had unlocked access to technologies that could permanently cement his hold over this part of the drowned world. We need perfect visibility underwater, Jarl. Caleb stood at the Triton's central console, where Gunnar, following his dictation, was installing a new system. Until now, we've moved underwater blind, relying solely on my voice of the abyss. But my vessel's strength isn't limitless. Before the engineers lay a new instrument, the Echo 1 man-acoustic sonar. It was a complex assembly of polished copper and crystal lenses, connected to the bow of the ship through a through-hull waveguide. Inside the instrument sat a special crystalline core, which emitted thin, directed pulses of mana through the mass of water, reflecting off underwater rocks, ship's keels, or large creatures. This pulse returned, projecting a clear three-dimensional map of the surroundings within a 5-mile radius onto a round glass panel in the conning tower. "Start up," Torvald, Caleb ordered. The cocker flipped a switch. The crystal inside the sonar began to sing low, vibrating. On the glass screen, coated in fluorescent mastic, green outlines of the dead reef lagoon slowly emerged, along with the shape of the underwater tunnel and the clan's rafts floating on the surface. "Incredible," Gunnar whispered, afraid to touch the glowing glass. "We can see the darkness itself." Module manhwarecap sonar successfully integrated terrain scan accuracy, 98%. Moving target detection. Automatic. Suddenly, a green marker at the edge of the screen began blinking frantically. The sonar had picked up heavy, slow vibrations coming from the direction of the open sea. 3 large surface silhouettes were approaching the borders of the dead reef, but they moved at dead slow speed, with no cannon fire and no trails of smoke. Moreover, at the masthead of the lead vessel, according to signals from surface lookouts, a white flag flew, the sign of unconditional truce. These were the surviving merchant barons. They had come crawling themselves. The meeting was set on the deck of the black driftwood, which now rocked proudly at the entrance to the lagoon, gleaming with her new iron scales. Caleb sat in a chair on the quarterdeck, his father's heavy cloak thrown over his shoulders. On his right stood Bran, encased in his bulky copper Diver 1 suit without the helmet, his grim face and scars serving as an excellent reminder of the cost of failure. On his left stood Mara, lazily tossing a forged dirk in her palm. 3 people climbed from a launch onto the schooner's deck. Baron Crass, who had miraculously survived the flagship's explosion, the entire left side of his face now wrapped in dirty bandages. Baroness Sylvia in a wet but costly velvet gown, and a representative of the Iron Clan's surviving engineers, a pale old man in a leather apron. When they saw that the ghost of the deep, destroyer of the greatest fleet in the world, was in fact a 13-year-old boy with a left eye the color of pure abyss, Baron Crass staggered. "So it's you," Crass rasped, clutching at his heart. "The boy from the clan of the Dead Reef?" "My name is Jarl Caleb," Jun-ho answered calmly, not even rising from his seat. His voice, amplified by mana, made the barons flinch. "And you've come onto my lands uninvited. Speak quickly as to why you're here, before my torpedoes find whatever ships you have left." Baroness Sylvia stepped forward, gracefully lowering herself to one knee. She understood that the old age of brute force and steam boilers had ended, An age was dawning that belonged to those who ruled the deep. "We've come to sue for peace, Jarl Caleb," she said quietly, holding out to the boy a heavy ebony chest. Inside lay 3 flawless top-rank light crystals and an ancient scroll map of the underwater currents. "The trade crossroads recognizes your authority over the northern routes. We're prepared to pay you 30% of every trade transaction. We will give you metal, coal, slaves, whatever the clan of the Dead Reef demands. Only don't sink our ships. Without trade, we'll all starve to death on these rotting rafts." Caleb looked at the chest, then at the frightened rulers of the boundless expanse. The rescuer inside him knew. If he destroyed trade entirely, this world would sink into utter chaos and cannibalism. He needed resources for a much larger project, building a full-fledged underwater city. "I have no need of slaves," Caleb said coldly. "The clan of the Dead Reef no longer uses slave labor. Those who wish to work in our shipyards and mines will receive rations and protection. As for 30%, that isn't enough." Baron Crass paled further still. "But Caleb, that would ruin us." "You'll give 50%. The boy Jarl cut him off, rising from his chair. His cloak billowed in the sea wind. "But in return, the clan of the Dead Reef guarantees you absolute safety. No privateer, no monster of the abyss will touch your trade caravans. We will take all underwater routes from the Dead Reef to the southern Sargasso under our protection. My ship will patrol the depths. Any vessel flying the flag with the black fin will have my personal protection." The barons exchanged glances. The terms were crushing, but the alternative was a swift, cold death in the depths. We agree," Sylvia breathed. "Warning. World Pact Iron Fin concluded the clan of the Dead Reef becomes the dominant power in the sector. Monthly resource inflow to the Citadel. Plus 1,000 units of metal, plus 500 units of anthracite, plus 5 light crystals when the Baron's launch pulled away. Brand shed his suit's heavy manipulators and let out a loud breath. "Jarl, 50%. Why? We're richer now than Vane ever was in his best years. This gold and metal won't go toward luxury, Bran." Caleb looked down, toward where the outline of their underwater base could be made out beneath the clear water. "Now that we have the resources of the entire crossroads, we begin Phase 2. We expand Shelter 1 into a full underwater settlement, New Sol. We'll lay the slipways for 2 more Triton-class submarines. Our fleet needs to become more than just a ghost story. It needs to become an unstoppable force." Junho returned to his cabin. The system unfurled new, sweeping blueprints before his eyes, requiring a colossal amount of iron and energy. The time was coming when the people of this world would leave the dangerous surface behind for good and descend to where, under the stewardship of a Korean engineer, a new future for humanity was being built.